Written in Blood is the second adventure in Through the Radiant Citadel. It is intended for third level characters and was written by Erin Roberts, although I'm hoping she didn't write it in blood. This will be a spoiler-filled review intended for DMs that will start with a quick summary followed by an in-depth look of the events of the adventure. Players begin in God's Breath in the town of Promise. This is an agricultural-based community that is currently celebrating the Awakening Festival. During the festival, a group of possessed farmers attack celebrating citizens. The attackers hold a clue leading one NPC, Aunt Deli, to become concerned for a goddaughter Kiana. The players are hired to travel half a day to check on Kiana at her home. Kiana has been under dark influences, preying on the guilt she feels for the death of her childhood friend. Kiana's mind has been tortured into creating a terrifying creature that is also mind-controlling other farmers. Characters must defeat the creature and hopefully avoid too many innocent people dying in the process. Alright, so let's dig into the details. The Awakening Festival is a good hook to get your players into the Town of Promise, celebration singing. The Awakening song tells the story of the people of God's Breath. It gets longer each year with new events being added. Assuming your players listen to the song, they'll have knowledge of God's Breath. You can avoid a big exposition dump and just have them roll to see if they recall bits of the song later if they want to know something. Things really kick off when farmers with blood-red eyes begin to attack random people in the crowd. They bear all the classic signs of mind control. The attackers use a cultist stat block and don't pose any real threat to a level 3 party. But I think fights like this are a great character building moment. Players need to think, does my character try and eliminate the threat as quick as possible? Or do I try to subdue the mind control persons in hopes they could be saved? Or maybe I should just run away and play it safe. Regardless of how the mind-controlled farmers are dealt with, a strange drawing is found on one of them, showing a young boy being dragged underwater by disembodied hands. This is quickly identified by an NPC, Aunt Deli, as a drawing done by her goddaughter Kiana. Kiana witnessed her friend Cully drowning when they were both children and uses art as a therapy device. Characters may recall the Awakening song covering this incident. A Deli sinkhole opened up during a storm, swallowing up a farmhouse. Moving disembodied hands were seen near the water, and as the years went on, tragedy befell those who went near Cradle Lace Lake. Those tragedies include the drowning of young Cully. Aunt Deli wants to have the PCs go check on Kiana for her, who lives about a half-day's journey away. I think this is a really good hook. A lot of times games have PCs be the only hope for a town they just entered, making all the NPCs there kind of feel a bit helpless. Aunt Deli is a community leader and needs to deal with the aftermath of the attack. Sure, it does turn out that Kiana's the key to the whole adventure, but at this point, it's the players are going on a small errand, and it just so happens to save them. And once they agree, NPCs will start offering to go to the party. There's Lady Dre, a businesswoman, and Tungsten Ward, who helps write the Awakening song. Unless you're wanting to run a full campaign in God's Breath, these might be skippable NPCs. You might want to skip both or one of them. It's just not super plot relevant to have them there. They do provide exposition for the land if the players have questions. So you can do one of them, or I just changed Aunt Deli a bit. She doesn't really need to remain hidden for the community. There's other people for that, but ask the characters to escort her to Kiana. She fears for Kiana's safety and has seen the characters' fighting prowess. Regardless of who or how many NPCs tag along, the party travels to Kiana's by wagon. There are a couple events that happen while traveling, and whenever I think of traveling encounters, there's 5 questions I like to ask. Does the encounter enhance the setting, the plot, the characters, the gameplay, or the fun? The first encounter involves the party attempting to save a farmer, whom they find is named Uncle Polder, from massive coyotes, utilizing the direwolf stat block. Does this enhance the setting? I think so. It's showing that the outskirts of town, called the Rattle, is a dangerous place. The party hasn't had any encounters here before, so they are just learning how dangerous of a place it is. For the people who live here. Does it enhance the plot? I don't think so. Uncle Polder has met Kiana recently, and Kiana told Uncle Polder about her friend Coley, as if he was still alive. This is a good spooky detail that can be foreshadowing, but you can get it just as easily by having Uncle Polder walking by the side of the road asking for a lift. I think the coyote is actually a bit detracting from the plot. We're building up to a big spooky monster, and the impact of that reveal is going to be lessened if the players are just randomly running into unrelated monsters. It can muddle the plot a bit because the coyotes aren't related at all. Does this enhance the gameplay? Skipped one. Does this enhance characters? For me, this is a no. None of my characters had backgrounds or stories that would be altered or interested in coyotes. It would be a forgettable fight on a personal level for them. And the gameplay question is more about those players who like the game from a strategic standpoint. Does it enhance the challenge, make more difficult questions? And while it's unlikely the players will lose to the coyotes, but they won't get a long rest before the big final battle. So it does put a strain on their resources. Spells you cast, ability you use, you might not get back. You might go into the final battle with less health because of this. So yeah, it can make the game more interesting from a strategy level. The final question, does this enhance the fun, is kind of a catch-all question for encounters that are uniquely interesting to the party. Something really wild people have never seen before. So for me, this answer was a no. My players have fought plenty of direwolves in the past, and protecting an NPC is not something new to them either. Looking at my answers, I decided not to run this encounter. I always weight the questions differently depending on my goal. And I am not weighting the setting question very much because this is going to be run as a one-shot. But if you're looking to run it as a campaign in God's Breath, you might think differently. If you do run this encounter, remember coyotes are looking for a meal. They're not possessed. They don't want noble combat. They'll likely gang up on one character, like picking off the weakest member of a herd, hoping the rest of the humanoids will flee at this point, leaving them to the food. The coyotes flee if they take enough damage, and it becomes apparent they're not getting any food. The next event is a sinkhole opening up beneath the wagon, following a few tremors. Characters may take damage if they fail a saving throw. I have the same answers to my questions as with the coyotes, but I like this encounter somewhat, or even less, I'd say, because the sinkhole can really make things confusing. It's maybe supposed to relate to the sinkhole that begat Cradle Lace Lake, but it's tough to imagine crawling hands, digging around, and creating a sinkhole to begin with, and just at the right spot at the right time. It's a bit too much of a coincidence, and it doesn't really add to the horror. What it can do is have your NPC like, well, let me repair this, you go check on Kiana. But I don't know, it's a one I used because it was so short, but it's not something I felt added, and maybe muddled the plot a bit. Once we get to the farm, adventure really begins to shine. This is a great horror environment, and I want to begin by telling you about the monster finally. This is a soul shaker. It is terrifying. Soul shakers are described as a grasping mass of humanoid limbs that collect the severed limbs of corpses to add to its terrifying form. This is ghoulish. It does have an enthralling lure, which has been using to mind control farmers, but I think the best horror aspect is the grapple. It's very spooky to imagine being covered in a massive hands just pulling you deeper and deeper into a tangled mass of limbs. Whether or not you end up written in blood, this is a great monster to pilfer for your other adventures, though you may want to nix the enthralling lure if it's not narratively relevant. I think this would be a great addition to settings like Ravenloft, and be fun too to involve a wider variety of humanoid species. So the ball of limbs, you might see a dragon-born arm or a Kenku foot. But enough gushing, let's talk about the farm some more. The area has 8 visible farmhouses. Farmers here work together in a collective called packs. The nearest one has a massive red X on it. Was it written in blood as the title suggests? No, it's just muddy red paint, but still spooky. In fact, 7 of the 8 farmhouses have a large red X. In these houses, there's no one inside. It's deathly quiet. Perhaps for a lone crow cawing outside. The farmhouses are in terrible condition. People may find bloody handprints, signs of struggle, or even human bones. But eventually, the characters approach the house without a red X. This is Kiana's farmhouse. Kiana's farmhouse seems likewise unoccupied, but investigators discover horrors in every room. In the living room, there's a muddy drawing of Cully being dragged underwater. In the bedroom, the walls are covered in creepy artwork showing Cully drowning, eyes with hands as pupils, and other frightening images, and this kind of obsessive madness Kiana's been driven to. There's also a chest containing 13 wedding rings, which the player will realize as the wedding rings of the victims. This is a great creepy detail. It really humanizes the victims. And when the adventure is over, it causes the players to kind of question some things, like how deep was Kiana's madness? Maybe she's not as innocent as she seems. After all, the dark forces, the Soul Shaker, that doesn't really have a need for gold. The dining room contains crawling hands for what should be a short battle. They only have 2 hit points. I also left this one out because the battle is short, easy, and it doesn't really add to the horror. Like, I really like embracing that creepy silence. So instead I moved the hand battle to one of the empty farmhouses to preserve the terrifying silence of Kiana's. In this last room, the kitchen, there are 4 farmers, and the farmers are holding pitchforks or scythes or other farming weapons and just staring at one another. Their eyes are blood red. They're breathing heavily. It's very creepy. You're going to get a moment where someone opens the door, sees it, and slowly shuts it, trembling. The book has them fight back if the farmers are harmed, but I think it's creepier for them to be unresponsive even if attacked. Finally, there is a pantry leading down to a cave. In this cave is Kiana. As the players approach, they hear her singing. And she's singing the Awakening song during the part where Cully dies. Only she's changed the lyrics so Cully is triumphantly saved by his friend Kiana. Kiana is kind of not the best singer, and the lyrics don't super fit with the melody, but she's trying. In the book, she's just staring out in space. But I had her, hacking up a corpse limb to toss in the pile, which will be behind her. So the players see her, and just with a big old pile of arms and legs. No heads, no bodies, just arms and legs behind her. If they talk to Kiana, she'll switch between urging the characters to leave, and then switching to, hey, why don't you meet my friend Cully? Kiana's making no sense, and you can have this kind of creepy back and forth that you should try to cut off basically as soon as it stops being creepy. So really go by your players' reactions. And when it stops, it's because the pile of limbs gets up behind her, and the characters encounter the Soul Shaker. The Soul Shaker gets a once per day use of its enthralling ability to attempt to control on the characters, and the difficulty of this fight depends entirely on if the character fails the DC 12 Charisma saving throw. Taking one of the players out is huge, and turning one player against the rest is even bigger. Kiana is 4 hit points. She doesn't really participate in the fight, but if they're still alive, the farmers from the above room will come down and attempt to help out, again with the cultist stat block. Once the Soul Shaker is reduced to 0 hit points, it explodes into a number of crawling claws that attempt to escape to reform later. If the party emerges victorious, Kiana and any surviving farmers slowly regain their senses, remembering little of recent events. The party is regarded by heroes and woven into the Awakening song for years to come. So, despite the minor changes I recommended, I think this is a really solid horror adventure. And most of the changes I looked at was focusing on this being a single adventure rather than establishing a setting. And it's totally valid either way you want to play it. I really liked that it wasn't the traditional spooky castle, cults, or whatever. This was a farmhouse that told a great horror story. Again, big fan of the Soul Shaker. I think that's great. If you're musically inclined, changing the words and have Kiana singing them hauntingly would be great. But yeah, I think this was a great thrill adventure, and I'd give it 2 thumbs up, or perhaps more if I ever gain all those extra limbs.